first point I would like to stress is that sometimes there's a tendency to generalize on issues such as debt in the region. And I think it's really important to acknowledge the heterogeneity of country circumstances, debt circumstances in the region. In particular, the debt challenge in the region is quite varied as our populations, our geography, our languages. And really, particularly issues like debt sustainability are best considered at a country-specific level, because even amongst countries where debt is unsustainable, the solution and the way forward can often vary country to country, even if all of those countries need some kind of debt reprofiling. So recognizing the heterogeneity of the debt situation in the region, I think, is perhaps one of the first things I want to stress. Second, to be able to come up with a way to address the debt challenge in the region, I think it's important to understand what the reasons behind it are. And in terms of explaining this broad increase in the level of debt that we've seen in the region starting around 2007 to where it has almost doubled to around the 60% of GDP mark in sub-Saharan Africa right now, I think there have been at least three important factors that have contributed to this. And the extent to which this has, the extent to which these factors have played a role varies from country to country. The first of these three factors, I think, has been, by and large, an increase in fiscal deficits that we've seen in the region starting around 2008-9. And the increase in deficits was largely motivated by higher spending on infrastructure, but also recurrent spending, particularly on health, education. So these investments in human capital and physical capital that we've seen changing the landscape in the region were important contributors also of the strong growth that we saw. One thing countries have been weaker at, though, is collecting the rate of return on all of this investment, capturing this rate of return through the tax system. So fiscal deficits have remained elevated in many countries, and this, of course, has contributed to the increase in debt. A second factor that's really played a significant role, I think, has been shocks, and in particular two significant shocks that have hit the region recently. First one was the decline in commodity prices that we saw around 2014-15. It was a really significant decline. I think, oil prices collapsed by the biggest amount since the 1970s, for example, impacting countries like Chad, Republic of Congo, and many others quite significantly, but also metals prices. So the fiscal deficits of countries like Sierra Leone, countries like Zambia were significantly impacted by that decline in commodity prices. And then, of course, with the advent of the pandemic, that's hugely systemic shock across the region, affecting lives and livelihoods, as you all know, of course, but importantly also, of course, the sovereign balance sheets in the most brutal of ways. So the role of shocks also has to be recognized. So again, to repeat, the first factor, I think, was policies. Second one has been shocks. The third important factor, I think, has been one structural factor, which is the terms of financing facing the region have not been as favorable as they were in the past. You all know about the issue of official development assistance not keeping pace with the needs of our countries, with the development spending needs of our countries, and even declining in the case of some countries, and increasingly countries having to borrow at commercial terms. So again, this is something that has contributed to the increase in debt pressures that we've seen in the region. So these three broad factors are what we would need to work on going forward to have a robust recovery in the region. I'm happy to say that from the fund's perspective, we've been trying to contribute as much as possible. Historically, we've never supported the region as much as we have over the last couple of years. Just to flag, last year we provided 13 times the normal amount of financing that we provide to Africa. Of course, it was an exceptional year, but our support was not limited to what we did last year, and this year, just this week, in fact, the largest ever SDR allocation has gone through, which will provide quite a significant boost to the tune of about $30 billion, more than $30 billion for Africa as a whole this year in fiscal space to countries. And importantly, the form of financing that we're providing is exceptionally low interest rate financing. So this will be particularly helpful. But beyond such financing, and more of it is needed, we feel in the coming years, we think that there are also, of course, policy areas that need to be worked on. As I touched on earlier, I think it's really important that going forward, countries make more of an effort to try and capture the rate of return on all of this investment that has been made in the past and is going to be made in the future through the tax systems, through higher domestic revenue mobilization. That's, I think, very important reform that many countries face. Second, I think we need a more robust and agile debt restructuring framework so that those countries facing debt difficulties can have their debt challenges addressed relatively timely way. And then third, important factor we ought not to forget about is also sustained long-term cheap financing, in particular over the next few years, to help the region enjoy a robust recovery and reverse a lot of the increase in poverty and other effects that we've seen as a result of the pandemic. Okay. Thank you so much for inviting the IMF to contribute.
To read and sign the Harare Declaration, go to www.afrodat.org/initiatives. Click on Afrodat Conference on Debt and Development, and then read more. And finally, the outcome statement.